Emily sat by the window of her cozy apartment, her gaze fixed on the city skyline as she sipped her coffee. Life had been moving steadily forward, and for the most part, it felt perfect. She had a job she loved, friends who supported her, and a relationship with Ryan that was everything she had ever hoped for. They'd been together for over a year now, and every day felt like a reminder of how lucky she was to have found someone so genuine, loving, and understanding. They'd built a life together that felt like a true partnership, mutual respect, shared dreams, and endless laughter. Ryan was everything Emily could ask for in a partner. He had a quiet strength about him, always there to support her dreams while never hesitating to make her feel special. He knew how to comfort her when work was stressful, and how to make her laugh when the world felt too heavy. Their relationship had a natural flow, a deep, unspoken connection that was hard to put into words. Emily had never once doubted Ryan's loyalty, trusting him wholeheartedly. But life, as it often does, had thrown a few curveballs their way. Olivia, Emily's stepsister, had been living with them for the past few months. The living arrangement was temporary, as Olivia was dealing with personal issues that had made her feel displaced. Emily wasn't thrilled about the sudden change, especially since Olivia wasn't exactly her closest confidant. The two had always kept their distance, navigating a relationship that was civil, but not particularly close. There was a lingering tension, a kind of unspoken discomfort, whenever they were in the same room. Olivia had always been a bit of an enigma to Emily. She was quiet, withdrawn, and often seemed to carry a certain air of superiority. But despite the strain, Emily knew that family came first. She had made an effort to keep the peace, welcoming Olivia into their home with open arms, knowing her parents expected them to get along. At times, Emily even wondered if Olivia's more distant behavior was a result of the pressure to fit in her own personal struggles. Still, Emily did her best to show kindness, offering a listening ear whenever Olivia needed it, even though their relationship remained polite at best. As Emily sat back in a chair, thinking about everything that had happened in the past year, she felt an odd sense of balance. Ryan, despite his quiet moments of reflection, seemed like the person she was meant to be with. Olivia, too, had settled into the rhythm of their home, even if things were never perfect between them. Life wasn't without its challenges, but Emily believed in the strength of the bonds she had worked hard to build. Little did she know, the very trust she had in Ryan and the delicate peace she'd maintained with Olivia was about to be shattered. In the days ahead, things would take an unexpected turn, and Emily's perfect world would begin to crumble, leaving her to question everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and family. The weeks after Olivia moved in had been busier than Emily had expected. Work was demanding, and though she loved her job, the long hours left little time for anything else. Ryan, too, had become increasingly preoccupied with his own projects. His job required him to travel more frequently, but even when he was home, it seemed like he was always busy with something. The once effortless connection they had shared started to feel strained, like a thread pulling too tight. It began subtly, Ryan's responses to her questions growing shorter, his eyes distracted when she spoke, and the long phone calls that became a routine before he went to bed. Emily would catch glimpses of his phone flashing with incoming messages, though he'd quickly swipe it out of sight, his face growing guarded for just a moment too long. He would explain it away, of course, with something like work stress or friends checking in, but the pattern was becoming undeniable. The warmth that had once marked their interactions was being replaced by a growing silence. "I'm just tired," Ryan had explained one evening, when Emily tried to talk about the growing distance between them. "You know how it is. I've been swamped with work. Just need a little space, that's all." Emily had nodded, pretending to understand, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't like Ryan to withdraw. He was always the one who'd initiate conversation, the one who would talk through his problems. So why was he now retreating into himself, barely speaking when they were together? She convinced herself that everything would return to normal once the stress settled, that this was just a temporary phase. After all, they had been through so much together, and she trusted him implicitly. But a knot began to form in her stomach, a subtle unease that wouldn't go away. Olivia, too, was behaving strangely. Emily had tried to give her space, respecting the fact that her stepsister was going through a tough time, but Olivia's actions were becoming harder to ignore. She spent hours in her room, rarely emerging except for meals, and when she did, there was a noticeable shift in her demeanor. Olivia's usual quietness had grown into something more. Her smile seemed forced, her glances too quick, like she was hiding something. Emily hadn't spoken much to her lately, but Olivia's strange behavior didn't escape her notice. One afternoon, when Emily had come home early from work, she caught Olivia quickly hanging up the phone. The brief, awkward exchange made Emily's chest tighten. Olivia had smiled, but there was something different about it, something that didn't quite sit right. Emily had asked her what she was up to, and Olivia had shrugged, offering a quick excuse about catching up with an old friend. Emily had no reason to doubt her, but her gut told her something was off. Still, she brushed it off. Olivia was going through her own challenges, and maybe this was just part of her trying to adjust. But the next few days brought more unsettling moments. At a family gathering one evening, Emily noticed something that made her pause. Ryan and Olivia were standing together in the kitchen, their heads close as they whispered to each other, sharing a laugh that seemed too private. Emily watched from across the room, a frown tugging at her lips. The interaction was innocent enough, but the way they seemed so at ease with each other, the way Ryan's eyes lingered on Olivia's smile, there was an intimacy there that didn't sit well with Emily. She quickly shook off the thought. It was probably nothing. Maybe they were just getting along better, or maybe it was just a fluke. Ryan and Olivia had always been cordial, but not overly familiar. Still, that moment left a lingering question in her mind, an itch she couldn't quite scratch. Emily found herself watching them more closely over the next few days, noticing their interactions in a new light. She caught Ryan sneaking glances at Olivia when he thought no one was looking, and Olivia, in turn, seemed unusually aware of his presence. There were no overt signs of anything suspicious, no obvious flirtation, no inappropriate behavior, but the subtlety of their actions only made it feel worse. Emily started questioning her own instincts, wondering if she was reading too much into things. After all, they were family, right? Ryan and Olivia were just getting along better. Maybe she was just being paranoid. But every time she saw them together, a small knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. One evening, after Ryan had left for a business trip, Emily sat in the living room, staring at her phone. She had a strange feeling that she couldn't shake, a sense that something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She glanced over at Olivia, who was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. The tension in the room was palpable, and Emily felt a deep sense of unease that only grew as the night wore on. Olivia seemed distant, her eyes avoiding Emily's, as though she were lost in thought. Emily stood up and went to the kitchen, trying to push the thoughts out of her mind. But as she opened the fridge, her hand shook slightly. Something was wrong, she could feel it in the pit of her stomach, gnawing at her. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself that everything was fine, there was a part of her that knew the truth. Things were starting to change, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for the reality of what that might mean. As Emily tried to shake off the nagging feeling in her chest, she couldn't help but wonder, was it just her, or was something more sinister happening between Ryan and Olivia? Would the answers, if they existed, be as painful as she feared? Emily had been looking forward to the weekend getaway with her friends. It had been months since she'd had a break, and after the strange tension with Ryan and Olivia, she needed some time to clear her head. They had been spending less time together, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But this trip, this was supposed to be her opportunity to reconnect with herself, to remind herself that everything would be fine when she got back. The weekend was filled with laughter, distractions, and long talks with her friends, but a part of her was always thinking about home. Ryan and Olivia were still on her mind, and despite her best efforts to push those thoughts away, they lingered, like shadows in the back of her mind. She kept texting Ryan, sending him little messages of love and missing him. But each response felt distant, colder than before, and when Olivia didn't reply to her texts as often, Emily tried not to dwell on it, telling herself that maybe her stepsister just needed space. By Sunday afternoon, Emily was ready to return home. She felt exhausted from all the emotional strain, and the thought of being with Ryan and Olivia again, even if things were tense, was comforting. She had planned to surprise them both with a homemade dinner, a peace offering of sorts, something to break the silence that had settled between them. Emily couldn't help but imagine how the evening would unfold, how she'd surprise Ryan with his favorite dish, and how Olivia would appreciate the effort. When she arrived home earlier than expected, the house was quiet. A wave of relief washed over her as she unlocked the door, thinking that maybe they were out enjoying the last hours of the weekend. The kitchen was empty, and the living room was as still as a photograph. But as she walked down the hallway toward their bedroom, She felt an inexplicable tension hanging in the air, a strange heaviness that felt different from before. She paused in the doorway of their room, her breath catching in her throat. The sight before her stopped her dead in her tracks. Ryan and Olivia were on the bed, and what she saw was a betrayal too painful to comprehend. Olivia's head was on Ryan's chest, her arm wrapped around him, and Ryan was holding her close, a look of sheer comfort and intimacy on his face. But it wasn't just their proximity that made Emily's heart shatter, it was the way they were intertwined, the way their bodies were so effortlessly close, so familiar, as if there was no line between them that hadn't already been crossed. Ryan's hand slid across Olivia's back, his fingers grazing her skin, a touch that was meant for no one but Emily. But here it was, shared between Olivia and him, as if Emily had never existed at all. The betrayal was so vivid, so raw, that for a moment, Emily couldn't even feel the ground beneath her feet. She didn't know if she wanted to scream, cry, or run away. The shock left her frozen in place, her eyes locked on the scene that was unfolding before her. The intimacy between Ryan and Olivia was undeniable. There was no way to deny the closeness, the connection, the affection that was shared between them in that moment. Emily's chest tightened, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She didn't know what to do. Her mind raced as she tried to process the image before her. Ryan, her partner, the man she trusted above all others, was holding her stepsister, the one person she had tried to maintain a peaceful relationship with despite their differences. The thought of it made her stomach churn. She felt sick to her core, but all she could do was stand there, paralyzed by the truth. The noise of her breath must have been louder than she realized, for Ryan turned his head and saw her standing there in the doorway, his face drained of color, his eyes wide with panic, as if he had been caught in the act of something unthinkable. For a long, agonizing second, no one moved. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the pounding of Emily's heart in her chest. "Emily," Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. But Emily couldn't speak. She couldn't find the words. It felt like the world around her had shifted, leaving her suspended in some surreal nightmare. She could barely comprehend what she was seeing, the betrayal so deep that she couldn't wrap her mind around it. She thought she knew Ryan. She thought she knew Olivia. But here they were, caught in the act of something she never could have imagined. Olivia, too, had turned to face her, her expression one of guilt mixed with fear. She quickly pulled away from Ryan, sitting up on the bed and tucking her knees to her chest. But the damage was done. The look on Olivia's face, the way she couldn't even meet Emily's gaze, told Emily everything she needed to know. It felt like everything around her began to close in. The walls, the floor, the air, it all seemed to shrink as she struggled to hold herself together. She wanted to scream, to shout at them both for what they had done, but no words came out. The betrayal wasn't just about the physical act, it was the violation of trust, the shattering of the foundation that she had spent so long building. Ryan slowly got out of the bed, but Emily took a step back, instinctively pulling herself away from him, as though just his presence was enough to make her want to retreat. She couldn't bear to touch him, to be near him in that moment. The person she had thought she knew, the person she had loved, was standing there caught in a lie, in a betrayal, and Emily could feel every ounce of her trust in him crumble. "Emily, please, let me explain," Ryan said, his voice shaky, but Emily didn't want to hear it. There were no words that could explain what she had seen, no apology that could erase the pain she felt in that moment. She turned on her heel and walked out of the room, not bothering to look back. Each step she took felt like it took her further away from the life she had once known, from the love she thought she could trust. She needed to leave. She needed space. The weight of everything, the lies, the deceit was too much to bear, and she had to escape the suffocating reality of it all. As she slammed the door behind her and collapsed against the wall outside their bedroom, Emily's heart shattered into a million pieces. She had trusted Ryan. She had trusted Olivia. And now she was left with nothing but the cold sting of betrayal. Emily's heart was racing as she paced back and forth in the living room. The weight of what had just happened still hung heavy in the air, a thick fog of betrayal that clouded her mind. She couldn't process the scene she had just walked in on. Everything she had known, everything she had trusted, was now shattered. Her body trembled as the rush of emotions overwhelmed her: anger, sadness, disbelief, and an aching pain that threatened to consume her. The room felt suffocating as Emily's thoughts spiraled. She had to face them. Ryan and Olivia had to confront the two people who had betrayed her in ways she never could have imagined. The betrayal was too raw, too fresh, and yet Emily knew she couldn't just run away from it. She needed answers. She needed to know why they did this to her, why they had thrown everything they had together away. The front door opened, and Emily heard Ryan's hesitant footsteps. He appeared in the doorway of the living room, looking at her with guilt etched all over his face. His expression was torn, and Emily could see how shaken he was, but it didn't matter. Nothing could undo what he had done. "Emily, please, just listen," Ryan said, his voice soft, almost pleading. "I never meant for this to happen. I don't know what went wrong." The words hit her like a slap to the face. She didn't want to hear it, didn't want to hear any excuses, any attempts at justifying what was unforgivable. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, trying to keep her composure, but the fury bubbling inside of her threatened to spill over. "No," Emily snapped, her voice rising. "You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to say it was a mistake. How could you? How could you betray me like that? We had a life together. What we had wasn't just some fling. How could you throw it all away for her?" Ryan flinched at the force of her words, but he didn't look away. "It wasn't like that, Emily. It wasn't intentional. It just happened. Happened," Emily repeated, her voice dangerously low. "It just happened. You didn't think about me. You didn't think about what this would do to me." Ryan ran his hands through his hair, looking desperate. "I know I messed up, okay? I'm not proud of it, but you've been distant lately. You're always working, always busy. We've been drifting apart, and Olivia was there. She listened to me. She was just there for me when I needed someone." Emily could feel the heat of anger rise in her chest. "So it's my fault? You cheated because I've been distant? Is that what you're saying?" "No, I'm not saying that," Ryan quickly responded, shaking his head. "I know that's not an excuse, but it was a mistake. A huge mistake." Before Emily could respond, Olivia appeared in the doorway behind Ryan, her face pale and filled with guilt. She had been quiet, standing in the background, waiting for Ryan to speak, but now, with all the attention turned on her, she couldn't remain silent any longer. "I am sorry, Emily," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "I really am. But I need to explain. Please, just let me explain." Emily's eyes locked onto her stepsister. The betrayal cut even deeper now that Olivia was involved. She had always known there was tension between them, but she never imagined it would lead to this, her own flesh and blood betraying her in such an unforgivable way. "Explain." Emily's voice was bitter, laced with disbelief. "Explain how you thought it was okay to sleep with my boyfriend, my fiancé. What could you possibly say to make this right?" Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Emily. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "I swear I never wanted any of this to happen." "Then what?" Emily demanded, her anger breaking through the cracks in her voice. "What was this? How did it even begin?" Olivia looked down, her hands wringing together in her lap. It started slowly. I started feeling things for Ryan, things I shouldn't have. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I couldn't stop. I didn't want to betray you, Emily. I didn't want to hurt you, but I was confused, and I was ashamed of what I was feeling. So you're ashamed." Emily cut her off, her voice now shaking with disbelief and hurt. "You're ashamed? You're telling me you betrayed me, and you're sorry because you were ashamed?" I tried to push my feelings away," Olivia interrupted, her voice breaking, "but I couldn't. And when Ryan and I started talking more, I started to feel like maybe he felt the same way. I was so stupid. I should have come to you, told you how I felt. But I was afraid you'd hate me, and I didn't want that. I didn't want to lose you, Emily. But I was selfish. I was weak." Emily's stomach churned at Olivia's words. "So, this was about you? About your feelings?" she asked, her voice low and venomous. "What about me? What about my feelings, Olivia? Did you think about me for 1 second while you were with him?" Olivia burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I know I hurt you. I know I ruined everything, and I hate myself for it. But I didn't know what to do. I should have stopped, but I didn't." Ryan looked at Emily, his eyes filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Em," he said, his voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to betray you, but I did. And I regret it. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do is say how sorry I am. I was wrong." Emily stood there in stunned silence, her heart aching with every word they said. She had never felt so torn, so lost. Ryan, the man she had loved and trusted, had betrayed her in the most intimate way possible. And Olivia, her own stepsister, the one she had tried so hard to keep in her life, had crossed a line that could never be undone. The room was thick with guilt and pain, but Emily didn't know what to do. Her hands were trembling, her chest tight with the weight of the situation. She could feel the walls closing in on her, and she realized she had to make a decision, one that would determine what kind of person she wanted to be and what kind of future she could still have. Her voice came out steady, though the pain was clear. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said softly, her eyes meeting both of theirs, though she couldn't bring herself to look at them for long. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." The days following the confrontation were a blur for Emily, each moment heavy with the weight of betrayal. It felt as if the ground beneath her had been ripped away, leaving her floating in an endless, empty space. She had tried to make sense of everything, but the pain of it all was so consuming that it clouded every thought, every decision. Her apartment, once filled with laughter and love, now felt cold and desolate. The walls seemed to close in on her, the silence louder than any noise. She had never imagined she would be in this position, not with Ryan, the man she had loved so deeply, and certainly not with Olivia, her own stepsister. Yet here she was, standing in the aftermath of their lies, shattered beyond recognition. Emily had told herself that she could handle this, that she would find a way to move past the betrayal. But as each day passed, the reality set in harder. Ryan and Olivia had both played pivotal roles in her life. Ryan, her boyfriend, the person she thought she would spend forever with, and Olivia, the girl who had once been her closest confidante. Now, both of them felt like strangers to her. In the days that followed, Emily made the painful decision to cut ties with both of them. She couldn't stomach being around them, couldn't stand to see their faces without the searing anger and pain bubbling up within her. Olivia, too, had been a part of her world for so long, sharing family holidays, laughing together, and even sharing secrets as they navigated life. To think that Olivia had crossed such an unforgivable line left Emily with a sense of betrayal so deep, it felt like an open wound that would never heal. Olivia's departure was swift. She packed her things, not saying much, though her eyes were filled with tears as she glanced back one final time. Emily didn't have the strength to offer any words of comfort. She was numb, her heart too broken to show any sign of compassion. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was just a hollow emptiness, a void that had replaced all the love and trust she had once had for the people closest to her. As the door closed behind Olivia, the reality of her isolation hit Emily with full force. The apartment felt colder, quieter, as if it had lost its warmth and purpose. She sat down on the couch, her hands trembling as she tried to gather her thoughts. She couldn't understand how it had all gone so wrong, how her trust had been so thoroughly shattered. Ryan's attempts to reach out started almost immediately. He sent her countless texts, voicemails, and even showed up at her door one night, desperate for her to hear him out. Emily could hear the pleading in his voice, the remorse, but it was all too little, too late. She couldn't bring herself to open the door to him. Each message, each call, only reminded her of the deep betrayal she felt, the trust that had been so effortlessly broken. She stared at her phone, her finger hovering over his latest message. "Emily, I know I fucked up. Please just let me explain. I need you. I miss you. Can we talk?" The tears welled up again, blurring her vision. How could he think she could ever believe his words again? How could he possibly think that after everything, after what they had both done, she could just forgive him? It wasn't just the physical betrayal that stung. It was the emotional manipulation, the lies and the deceit. They had both chosen each other over her, and no apology could erase the hurt that came from that decision. Emily dropped the phone to the table with a harsh thud, the finality of it echoing in the quiet room. She refused to engage with him anymore. No matter how much he begged, no matter how much he claimed to have changed, it wouldn't matter. The trust between them was gone. There was no coming back from this. The days grew longer as she tried to navigate her life without the people who had once been her foundation. She found herself avoiding social media, muting any conversations about Ryan or Olivia. It felt like everyone was whispering behind her back, though she knew it was her own insecurity speaking. In the isolation of her apartment, Emily spent her days in a haze, sometimes working, sometimes just lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she would ever feel whole again. Her friends tried to be supportive, checking in regularly, offering comforting words and advice. They told her that time would heal the wounds, that she was strong enough to get through it, but their words felt distant, hollow. They didn't know what it felt like to be so betrayed by the people who should have loved and supported her unconditionally. They didn't know the sting of having your world turned upside down by the ones you trusted most. The loneliness was the hardest part. It wasn't just the absence of Ryan and Olivia in her life, it was the absence of the life she had built with them. All the memories, the moments of joy and connection, now felt tainted, as if they had never been real. Emily had no idea who she was without them, without the relationships she had spent years nurturing. It was as if she had lost not just two people, but an entire future she had imagined for herself. She tried to find comfort in the small things: a walk through the park, a cup of coffee with a friend, even the hum of her favorite song on the radio. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Every moment was a reminder of what she had lost. One evening, as Emily sat on the couch with a glass of wine in hand, she thought about how far she had fallen. She had once been so confident, so sure of herself and her relationship with Ryan. But now, she was a shell of the woman she used to be. The woman who trusted and loved freely had been replaced by someone who questioned everything, including her own worth. In the quiet of her apartment, Emily realized that she could no longer hold on to the past. Ryan and Olivia had made their choices, and she had to make hers. She couldn't stay in this emotional limbo, wondering what might have been. It wasn't about getting back what she had lost, it was about moving forward, even if it felt impossible. With a deep breath, Emily stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the world beyond. It was dark, the streets quiet, but in that moment she found a spark of clarity. She wasn't just a victim of their betrayal, she was more than that. She would rebuild herself piece by piece, even if it took time. The road ahead was uncertain, but she knew she couldn't stay frozen in the past. For the first time in days, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but she would heal. She would find herself again, beyond the heartbreak, beyond the lies, and maybe, just maybe, she would learn to trust again. The weeks following Emily's decision to sever ties with Ryan and Olivia were some of the hardest, yet most transformative, of her life. The grief and pain of betrayal still lingered in the back of her mind, but slowly, she began to realize that the life she had imagined for herself didn't have to be defined by their actions. She had always been a strong, confident woman, but she had never truly understood her own strength until this moment. For the first time in months, Emily could hear her own thoughts clearly. Her life no longer revolved around the toxic drama that had clouded her relationships with Ryan and Olivia. She could breathe again, truly breathe without the weight of their lies bearing down on her. In the early days after their departure, she had to focus on just getting through each day. It wasn't easy. There were nights she would sit up late, replaying the hurt, the anger, the confusion, and it felt like she would never escape the cycle of emotions. But she slowly realized that each day was a victory, a small step toward healing. She began distancing herself from her old routine, the places and people that reminded her of the betrayal. She spent less time scrolling through social media, especially posts that involved Ryan or Olivia, and more time doing things that made her feel grounded. Every moment of solitude brought its own challenges, but it also brought clarity. Emily knew she had to heal, not just for the sake of her own sanity, but for the future she wanted to create for herself. One of the first steps she took was to reconnect with her friends and family. They had supported her from the very beginning, offering words of comfort, and now they were the pillars she needed to lean on. Sarah, her best friend since childhood, was especially instrumental during this time. She would come over for movie nights, dinners, or just to sit in silence, letting Emily cry or rant as she needed. Sarah never pushed her to talk, but always made sure she knew that Emily wasn't alone in this journey. "You're so much stronger than this," Sarah would say, each time Emily doubted herself. "You've got a heart that's capable of so much more than those two losers." Her family, too, had rallied behind her, offering support and reminding her of the woman she had been before Ryan and Olivia came into her life. Her mother, especially, who had been a steady presence through every hardship, made sure Emily knew that this betrayal didn't define her. "You're still you. Her mother would remind her, "You're still that strong, independent woman who has always had the world at her feet. Don't let this break you." Though the emotional healing process was slow, Emily found that being surrounded by people who loved her gave her the strength she needed to rebuild. She also sought professional help, attending therapy sessions that allowed her to unpack the deeper emotions she had been suppressing. Talking to a therapist helped her gain perspective on what she had gone through and allowed her to learn that her feelings were valid. But more importantly, she started to learn how to cope, how to let go of the anger that no longer served her, and how to accept the pain as a part of her journey without letting it define her. With the support of her close circle, Emily began to slowly focus on herself. She started setting small, personal goals that didn't involve anyone else. Her passion for painting, which she had put on the back burner for so long, was reignited. She took an art class to immerse herself in creativity, using it as an outlet for all the emotions she was still processing. The act of painting became a healing experience, where every brushstroke allowed her to release some of the pain she had been holding onto. In these moments, Emily felt connected to herself in a way she hadn't in years when she painted. There was no betrayal, no heartbreak. It was just her and the canvas. As her creative side blossomed again, Emily also began exploring new interests that she had once pushed aside. She had always dreamed of traveling, of experiencing the world beyond the confines of her familiar surroundings. With the encouragement of her friends, Emily booked a solo trip to Europe. She had always told herself she would go once she had the time, but now she realized that waiting for the right moment was just an excuse. She needed this. She needed to break free from the past, to learn about herself in a new context, away from the painful reminders of home. The trip was an eye-opening experience for Emily. Traveling solo gave her the space to breathe, to rediscover the confidence and independence she had once taken for granted. There was something incredibly liberating about being in a foreign country, surrounded by strangers who didn't know her past, and having the freedom to simply be herself. She hiked through the hills of Switzerland, visited art galleries in Paris, and sat by the canals in Amsterdam, reflecting on how far she had come. Each place she visited offered her a new perspective on life. She learned to trust herself more, to make decisions without second-guessing her instincts. The solitude of her travels gave her the space to reflect on her own journey and how much strength she had found through adversity. For the first time in months, Emily felt like she was truly reclaiming her life, and with each passing day, she grew more comfortable with the idea of moving on. Emily also started setting professional goals for herself. Her job, which had once been a source of comfort and stability, now felt like a space where she could excel, independent of her past relationships. She threw herself into her work, taking on new challenges and pushing herself to achieve things she hadn't thought possible. She felt empowered, knowing that she was no longer defined by the people who had betrayed her. Her achievements at work were now a reflection of her own hard work and dedication, not influenced by Ryan or Olivia. As she continued her journey of self-discovery, Emily realized that the betrayal, though painful, had ultimately been a catalyst for her growth. It had forced her to confront parts of herself she hadn't even known existed: her strength, her resilience, and her ability to rebuild when everything seemed lost. She was no longer the same woman who had cried on the bathroom floor when she first discovered the betrayal. That woman had been broken, uncertain, and lost. But now Emily had a clarity about herself and a future that she had never known before. With time, the anger and bitterness she had once held toward Ryan and Olivia faded. She didn't need them to heal anymore. She had learned to trust herself, to value her own instincts and judgments. She understood that while she couldn't control the actions of others, she could control how she responded to them. And her response was one of empowerment, not victimhood. As Emily stood on the edge of a new chapter in her life, she knew there would still be moments of sadness, memories of the people she had once loved, and the occasional pang of loneliness. But she also knew that she was stronger now, stronger than she had ever been. The woman who had been betrayed was now a woman who had reclaimed her life, her passions, and her future, and no one could take that away from her. Emily had learned to trust herself above all else, and in that trust she found her true strength. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Emily's life began to transform in ways she had never expected. The pain of betrayal, while never fully forgotten, had started to lose its grip on her. It no longer defined her, and with each passing day she grew stronger. The woman who had once been torn apart by Ryan's and Olivia's betrayal was now a woman who had learned to rise from the ashes, ready to embrace the future with open arms. Emily's newfound confidence was undeniable. She had spent months rebuilding herself, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. She no longer viewed herself through the lens of the heartbreak that had shattered her world. Instead, she saw someone capable of greatness, someone deserving of love and respect. She no longer cringed at the thought of the past, but accepted it as part of her journey, something that had shaped her into the person she was today. She had found peace in letting go. Ryan and Olivia, once the center of her universe, had faded into the background of her life. She had come to realize that, while their actions had hurt her deeply, they no longer held the power to dictate her happiness. Emily had learned that the most important relationship she would ever have was with herself, and she had worked tirelessly to rebuild that connection. Her future now seemed full of endless possibilities. Emily had embraced her career, her passions, and her independence. The trip to Europe had opened her eyes to the world beyond the boundaries of her old life, and she felt a renewed sense of adventure and excitement for what lay ahead. There was no longer any hesitation or fear of what the future might hold. She knew that she was capable of creating a life that was uniquely her own, one that was defined not by the past, but by the woman she was becoming. Emily had also found closure with Ryan and Olivia, albeit in her own way. She hadn't sought reconciliation or apologies. She had simply let them go, understanding that their actions were a reflection of their own flaws, not hers. The bitterness that once consumed her heart had softened over time, replaced by a sense of understanding. She couldn't change the past, but she had the power to shape her future, and that was more than enough. In her quiet moments, Emily would reflect on the lessons she had learned through it all, trusting herself, standing up for her worth, and never settling for less than she deserved. These were the pillars on which she would continue to build her life. She understood that life would have its ups and downs, but she now knew how to navigate them with grace and strength. As Emily looked ahead, there was no more fear, no more doubt. She was ready for whatever the future held, knowing she could handle whatever challenges came her way. She had emerged from the darkness of betrayal not broken, but empowered, and as she embraced this new chapter, Emily realized that her story had only just begun. The woman she had been was gone. The woman she was becoming, strong, confident, and fearless, was just beginning to shine.